Hi there, welcome to a series of videos called English for Emerson. We've been talking about early American history lately on this channel, and that's what we're going to be doing today. In our last lesson, we learned that the Puritans and the Pilgrims were some of the first colonists from England to America, and they set up the foundations of what constitutes a lot of American culture today. But there's a little bit of a disconnect here. Do you really, if you really think about religious fanatics who would sail across an ocean on a sailboat to start a whole new life in a whole new country, that's kind of a radical thing to do. And most religious, what you'd call fanatics, are not necessarily the most, shall we say, productive members of society. And there's nothing wrong with that, but they're generally not people who have a great deal of success at times. Do you follow me? Some of these people are a little bit mixed up in the head a lot of the time. And I think that's a fair thing to say. Maybe the Pilgrims weren't making the most rational decision by sailing across the ocean in a sailboat to come to a place where they had no houses, no food, no water, no friends, no way to survive. And if it hadn't have been for the Native Americans, they all would have died pretty much because they had no knowledge of how to farm the area or, do anything. They knew about praying, but they weren't necessarily the most practical people. So in this lesson, we're going to be talking about the more business-oriented side of early American history. How did this place really get going as successful as it is today? Because if you think about really radical religious cultures, they're not necessarily some of the most successful in terms of business. But America has been extremely successful in terms of nuts and bolts, making things happen in the business world. Well, what was it that really got the thing going in terms of getting some people here to set up shop and really move things forward in terms of progress? It's a very good question, and that's what we're going to talk about today. Here's the answer. It's a terrible habit, an absolutely terrible habit. It's all about tobacco. This stuff is a plant that is native to America. And that's what really got the whole thing going. Now I'm going to put out this horrible cigarette. Terrible habit. Absolutely terrible. It's a thing that you want to stay away from in life, tobacco, because it's extremely, extremely addictive. What does that mean? It means the body gets dependent on a chemical in tobacco called nicotine. And if you don't have it, you start to get very, very irritable and edgy. And tobacco, if you meet people who smoke a lot, they're kind of calm and usually kind of what you call chill, because they're always under the influence of this chemical called nicotine, which just kind of makes people a little bit less nervous. And the British and were kind of a nervous people, maybe a little bit high-strung, the Europeans. Well, this plant, tobacco, which is native to America, the Indians, when the first colonists came over, shared this with, I think, even maybe Columbus or some of the early settlers, and they took it back to England. And, it was part of Native American culture to smoke tobacco. Well, it's very, very interesting. They didn't really have it down to a science, tobacco. And one of the early colonists in the settlement known as Jamestown was a guy by the name of John Rolfe. I'll put up a painting of him. And there was a war that broke out between the early colonists and the Native Americans. And the colonists, at some point in their war with the Native Americans, they kidnapped a beautiful young Indian princess named Pocahontas. They took her from her tribe and held her basically as ransom, which means you're holding on to a prisoner hoping to get something for them. It's something common in warfare. You capture the enemy and hold him ransom. Well, while she was being held by the colonists, she fell in love with this Englishman by the name of John Rolfe. And their marriage of Pocahontas and John Rolfe kind of made a peace between the Indians and the Native Americans. Well, it just so happens that he was what you call a horticulturalist. He was a gardener, a very, very good one. And he began to experiment with the tobacco plants. And he developed what you'd call a variety, means a type of tobacco plant that was extremely sweet, and it was very, very, very pleasant. Had a nice aroma, a nice smell. It wasn't bitter. And anyway, they began to farm this variety of tobacco, and they began to ship it back to England for sale as a new kind of product for people to, enjoy. And people began to smoke in Europe and use it as snuff. They would snort it up their nostrils. Anyway, it became extremely popular. I'm going to put up the chart on the screen, okay? In the year 1612, this guy, John Rolfe, developed this new kind of sweet tobacco and sent some of it back to Europe. By the year 1615, they sent 2,000 pounds of it on ships, on sailing ships, that's a ton, back to England. People liked it. By the year 1620, they sent 40,000 pounds. That's 20 tons, okay, I believe. It's a big deal packing this stuff and sending it off on a sailboat to England, But it's business. People liked it. They enjoyed smoking. It was kind of a new thing, and so they shipped more of it. By the year 1650, they were sending 1.5 million pounds of this stuff back to Europe. And imagine this, by the year 1680, it was up to 25 million pounds of tobacco. It just so happens that the soil and the climate of what is known as Virginia and North Carolina, that kind of area of the East Coast of America, is just perfect for farming tobacco. And this new crop became a huge hit in what I don't know how to describe hit. It became very, very popular as a new thing to do in Europe, was to smoke and snort tobacco. People enjoyed it very, very much. They did not know that it had such terrible effects on your health and was so highly addictive. But it became a huge, huge business. Yes, the religious fanatics, the Puritans and the Pilgrims had a huge influence on American culture. But if you really think about it, America is about business. And tobacco was the first big business in North America. And they got what is the European continent hooked, I guess you could say, addicted to tobacco, and began to make a tremendous business sending this stuff across the ocean. It remains so to this day. The European people generally smoke more than Americans to this day. Whenever I've gone to Europe, a lot of people are smoking. It's a terrible, addictive habit, and something I would encourage people to stay away from. It is not good for your health at all. It's also very expensive because they tax the heck out of cigarette products. Well, this leads us to a question. Working out in those hot fields in the summertime, cutting that tobacco and stacking it to dry it and hauling it to the ships was a very, very unpleasant task. It was just a lot of hard work. And the Europeans who set up this business, they needed laborers, they needed workers to get out there in the fields and work in the tobacco fields and harvest this product and pack it into the ships. And they really didn't want to do it themselves. And they did not have enough workers to come work in these tobacco fields. Well, what were they going to do about it? How are they going to solve this problem? Well, that leads us to our next topic, which we will discuss next time on English for Emerson, the laborers who worked in the tobacco trade. And we'll see you next time on English for Emerson. Bye-bye.